Hi, my name's Tom. I'm Just Love's National Coordinator, which means it's my job to lead the staff team and oversee our vision and strategy and fundraising nationally, as well as a few other bits and pieces. I've been asked to share a fun fact about myself before we start. My surname is Christmas, and as a baby I actually grew up next to a family called the Easters. What a beautiful coincidence. I'm going to be talking today about Just Love's vision and values. Our vision is the destination we're journeying towards as an organisation. It's the hoped-for future that we long to see and bring about. I'm going to start by talking about that vision, some of that hope, and then going to introduce a model called the spiral, which helps to simplify that vision a little bit and helps us to work out what it looks like to bring that vision about in the student context. And then finally, I'm going to talk about the values. Just Love's vision is to inspire and release every Christian student to pursue the biblical call to social justice. This is not just about engaging with justice a little bit. It's not about having our heart in the right place but ultimately making no difference. It's about joining in with the mission of God. It's about raising up a generation into a whole lifelong pursuit of Jesus and justice. Why is this our vision? Well, it's quite simple. God cares about justice. The world is full of injustice that breaks his heart and should break ours, and the church just doesn't do enough about it. There's a verse in Amos 5 that says, "Let justice roll on like a river, righteousness like a never-ending stream." Yet so often for us today, justice is relegated to one Sunday a year, where we maybe hear a talk from a charity, give a little bit of money and pat ourselves on the back that we've done our bit. In Matthew 25, Jesus says that if we don't feed the hungry, if we don't welcome in the stranger, we don't welcome him. And yet in a country where hundreds of thousands of people are homeless, there are many Christians with spare rooms and second homes. Psalm 68 says that God sets the lonely in families. We have a social care system that leaves so many kids at much higher risk of ending up in prison, in prostitution, and dying much younger. Yet if every church in the UK rallied round and supported one family to foster or adopt, there would be no more kids in care. In the book of Numbers, God tells the people of Israel to welcome in the foreigner as if they were one of their own. And yet in the face of a global refugee crisis that has seen tens of millions displaced due to famine and conflict and persecution, the church in the US in particular, and to an extent here in the UK, has often supported government policies that close borders, refuse to take more people in, and at times even separate children from their parents in horrible conditions. God commissions Adam and Eve to go out and care for creation, to go and steward it, and yet we use up 3 times as many resources as our planet can sustain, flying around the world whenever convenient, while poorer countries are ravaged by the fires and floods of climate change. Jesus tells the rich young ruler that he must sell all he has and give it away to the poor if he wants to follow him. Yet here in the UK, particularly in wealthy areas like London and the South East, even the more generous Christians still have big houses, fast cars and fancy holidays, despite the fact that over 1 billion people in the world live on the equivalent of less than £1 a day. Jesus literally died on the cross to save us when we didn't deserve it. And we often just can't bring ourselves to cause even slight inconveniences in our lives to support the most vulnerable and suffering in a world full of injustice and difficulty. Isaiah 58 addresses the people of God who have a lot in common with our church today. They worship, they pray and they fast. They're eager for God to come near to them, but they neglect the most vulnerable. God says that this is not an acceptable kind of fast. This is not what he's looking for. He says it's not true fasting to loose the chains of injustice and untie the cords of the yoke, to set the oppressed free and to break every yoke. Is it not to share your food with the hungry and provide the poor wanderer with shelter, when you see the naked to clothe him and not to turn away from your own flesh and blood? We know that God wants to restore and redeem all things. And while we don't have the power to make everything perfect, we can join in with his mission and try to leave things better than we found them. What if in our lifetimes we saw hundreds of millions of people lifted out of extreme poverty, no longer despairing at the prospect of another day of being hungry and powerless, but empowered to participate and make a difference and flourish and create a better life for them and their families? What if we turned the tide on climate change and pioneered a green revolution that preserved our planet? What if refugees were not met in our country with hostility and suspicion, but were welcomed in with open arms? What if we put time and resources into developing smart policies on homelessness that tackled root causes and lifted thousands of people off the streets? What if we gave our money extravagantly yet thoughtfully to the most effective development charities that are going to make a big difference for the world's poorest? What if we saw a fight back against racial injustice, against modern-day slavery, against religious persecution? We want to see God's kingdom come, His will be done on earth as it is in heaven. We want to see the landscape of our nation and our world be forever transformed. We want to see politics become a place of humility, of dialogue and diversity, a place of compassion and innovation and vision that sets the tone for a society where everyone can flourish. We want to see healthcare and education and business and the arts flooded with faith and hope-filled leaders who work hard for change. We want to see the ever-growing church be the heartbeat of the nation, a place of integrity and safety that reaches out to anyone and everyone and enables communities around the country to flourish. We want to see many generations of leaders pursuing God and His call to justice, whether they're influencing in the corridors of power and prestige or serving in the alleyways of darkness and despair. And if we want to see that happen, the next generation of the church has to step up and do things differently. We need to think thoughtfully and strategically about our careers. We need to be extravagant with our giving. We need to be sacrificial with our lifestyles. We need to be engaged with our communities. And we need to do all of this at levels we've never seen before. And if we want to shift the next generation, there is no better place to do that at university. This is where people start to set the trajectories for the rest of their lives. We want to make sure that those trajectories are in line with God's mission and God's heart. A small change in direction, even a small change at this stage, can have a huge difference. I'll give you one example that's quite easy to put numbers to. There might be around 200 Christian students at your university at the moment. There might be more, there might be less, but let's say 200. If you get each of them to care a little bit more about justice, to the point where they become more generous in future and give away an additional 1% of their income. If we assume an average annual income of £25,000 a year for 40 years, that set of 200 students will give away an additional £2 million over their lifetime. And in 3 years' time, there'll be a whole new set of students to inspire and shift. And that doesn't even take into account the impact of their careers and their lifestyles and their volunteering. And that's just one university of more than 20 who are joining us for this training. That's a lot of impact for a little student society. We want to see the next generation step up. Because let's just think about who the people you study with could become. What about that girl who's got a real talent for natural sciences? Will she go and help fossil fuel companies make more profits? Or will she pioneer a thought revolution that turns the tide on climate change? What about that guy with a knack for student politics? He might want to go and work in Westminster afterwards. Will he just pursue power for its own sake? Or will he use it to serve the nation's poorest? What about that super keen Christian who's at every event and you know that they want to end up leading a church themselves? Will they lead in line with the status quo? Or will they envision a whole church into a lifelong pursuit of justice? What about the person who they're just really nice and you know they already want to go and work for a charity but they haven't thought loads about how to do that? Will they go on to be well-meaning but ultimately not have a huge impact? Or will you challenge them to think really critically and deeply about how to do charity well so that they have a real influence on that sector? What about the person who they're pretty sharp and they're already from a wealthy family and you kind of know that they're going to go and make millions in finance? Are they going to give a few percent of that away? Or could they live on just a few percent and give the other 95% away? What about the person who is really servant-hearted, they have a gift of hospitality, they just love to help out everywhere? Are they going to put that to use on their church's annual ski trip? Or are they going to become a pillar of the local volunteering community in a really tough town in the northeast? Or that social justice warrior who's really passionate now but they haven't really connected it into their faith? Will they go on to burn out? Or will you push them to lean into the discipleship and the spiritual rhythms that will allow them to sustain that for a lifetime? What about the quiet girl who studies computer sciences? Will she go on and make loads of money in big tech? Or will she think about how we can harness the power of artificial intelligence for good and how we can prevent it from doing harm? What about that guy who you just know is going to make a really great parent one day? Will they go and move into the comfortable Surrey suburbs where I grew up and raise the perfect nuclear family? Or will they think about fostering an adoption? Or perhaps go on to mentor kids on a tough inner city estate? Just think about who the people you're at university with could go on to become. We want people in Just Love to go on and be the leaders and innovators in the charity sector. We want them to be people who bring integrity and change to politics, who bring radical generosity and social responsibility to business, who bring transformation to industries and communities across the nation. That's what we long to see through Just Love. But it's not just about what people will go on to do in future. We can fight back against climate change now. We can fight back against homelessness now. We can fight back against modern day slavery now. And we want to invite you and your student communities to step into that. We want the university landscape to be transformed. When I arrived in Oxford, pretty much every day I would walk past a homeless person sitting on the streets. By the time I left Oxford 4 years later, quite often I would see a Just Love student sitting with one of their homeless friends, talking, laughing, eating, on some occasions even celebrating a birthday with a KFC bargain bucket. That might seem like a small change, but it felt like a significant one. What if every homeless person in a city centre in the UK was friends with a Christian student? What if every lonely elderly person knew that they'd soon be visited? What if disadvantaged young people knew that they were going to be mentored? I want to see students raising tens, if not hundreds of thousands of pounds for the best charities using innovative fundraising schemes. I want to see students doing brilliant research and collaborating across cities to run crucial campaigns that win the hearts and minds of key influencers and shape attitudes and policies towards some of the great justice issues of our time. I want to see hundreds of students praying late into the night for the justice issues that they care about, believing that God will intervene. We want the landscape of universities to be forever transformed. We don't just want this to be another student society. We don't just want this to be something that you squeeze in if you've got time. We want this to be something that makes a huge difference. We want this to be something that God moves through. We want this to be a culture-shifting, game-changing, generation-defining movement that we all get to play our part in. That's why we do this training today. That's why we give you these theological foundations. That's why we help you to think strategically, to engage with team dynamics and developing leaders, because that's the stuff that enables the Just Love vision to happen in your city. And that's the stuff that enables us to define a generation and raise up leaders into a whole life, lifelong pursuit of Jesus and justice. This is a big vision, and for me it's a really exciting vision. I hope it is for you too, but it can sometimes feel kind of far away. How do you take the people who you're at university with from where they are now to become those leaders who transform industries and communities as part of a whole life, lifelong pursuit of Jesus and justice? It's a pretty big shift. So we've mapped out this model called a spiral, which takes you through the different stages that we need someone to go through to take them from where they are now to where we want them to be. And your job, if you want to see the Just Love vision to inspire and release every Christian student to pursue the biblical call to social justice, if you want to see that happen in your city, your job is to take as many people as possible as far down this spiral as possible. We've got 5 different stages. I'm going to talk you through each of those stages and what it takes to move someone from one stage to the other. A picture of the spiral is going to come up on your screen, and then I'm going to take us through stage 1. So stage 1 is disengagement. This is where people are not yet engaging with, thinking about, acting on justice at all. It might be that they're actively antagonistic, they don't think justice is important, they think it's a distraction from the gospel and they don't want to engage with it. But often it's just that they haven't really thought about it, they haven't really been exposed to it. It's not that they're terrible people, it's just that no one's taught them, no one's taken them on this justice journey yet. And this may be where a lot of the Christians in your student community are, at disengagement. We want to move them on from disengagement to awakening. This doesn't necessarily mean that they're doing loads of stuff at the awakening stage, but it means that they're starting to get that this matters. Social justice matters to God. There is loads of injustice in the world. They care, they know that it's a big deal, they have the intention of engaging and acting and doing something about it. So how do we move someone from disengagement to awakening? We've got 4 things. The first is theology. If people are going to start caring about justice, if they're going to have that passion, they need to know what the Bible says about justice. They need to know that it matters to God. And we're going to do a big session on theology later. So you might want to put on inspiring Bible talks, in-depth Bible studies, theology panels that discuss different angles on this. But if you do those events that are designed to move someone from disengagement to awakening, make sure you get the right people in the room. Make sure you get those disengaged people there so they can be inspired and be awakened. So we've got theology, we've also got facts and stories. People probably broadly know that injustice exists. They'll have heard of climate change, they've probably heard of modern day slavery, they're aware of homelessness. But you need to bring it to life for them in a new way. You need to tell moving, engaging stories in creative ways, and you need to present facts in ways that can spur people into action, into that awakening stage. So we've got theology, we've got facts and stories, we've also got proximity. This is about bringing people into contact with victims of injustice in ways that they might never have done before. Something like going on a homeless outreach trip can be a good example of this. Well, this might feel like it's jumping towards the third stage of action straight away, but actually for some people, they need to be thrown into that context because it's so much harder to ignore injustice if you know the names and stories and faces of the people who are suffering as a result. So we might want to awaken them to injustice by putting them straight into proximity with people who are on the front lines of this stuff. The fourth thing is the Spirit's conviction. We can't bring this about ourselves. People need to meet with God and be shown that justice matters to Him. But we can pray for the people in our community, and we can put on prayer and worship events that make space for people to encounter that and encounter God's heart for justice in that way. So that's how we move people from stage 1, disengagement, to stage 2, awakening. We then want to move them from awakening to action. Action is about where people have developed their passion for social justice and they're now actually doing something about it. That might be volunteering, it might be campaigning, it might be fundraising, it might just be making changes to the way that they pray or to their day-to-day lifestyle. But they're starting to act, they're doing something about injustice at this stage. And there's 4 ways that we move someone from that awakening, where they're passionate but not active, to action, where they're doing stuff. The first of these is simply just opportunities. People might be on the cusp of acting, but they just don't have a way of doing it. We need to create space for that. There needs to be, in every Just Love group, an opportunity to go and volunteer, opportunities to join with a campaign, opportunities at some stage in the year to fundraise. We need to make sure those opportunities are there so that if people want to act, they can. The second thing is teaching. People might be on the cusp of acting, but they're a little bit nervous that they don't know what they're doing. We need to teach them some basics, give them some training. What's going on with this justice issue? How can you engage? What's some of the basic knowledge you need to start acting? This doesn't have to be super deep yet. It just needs to be the basics that give someone the confidence to act. The third thing is modelling. This is basically just living it in our own lives so that people are inspired by what we do and they follow it. If people see that you're volunteering, that you're fundraising, that you're making changes to your lifestyle and they're inspired by that, they'll start doing it too. You've shown them how to do it and they'll follow you. The fourth thing is called individualization. This is all about getting to know that person as an individual who's become passionate about justice but isn't acting, and going, well, what are some of your passions? What are some of your skills? What do you bring? What's your background? What could you do really well? And helping them map out a path that really works for them, that really takes who they are into account and is not just the same for everyone, but about working with individuals. So that's how we move people from awakening to action. We then want to look at stage 4, which is deepening. This is a really key stage in my opinion, because action is great, but there's a whole variety of actions that we can take, and some are better than others. Once we've been pursuing justice for a while, I've definitely been through this and a whole bunch of other people have, we realised that some of the stuff we did in the past wasn't actually that helpful. Maybe it didn't make any difference, maybe it even harmed people who were victims of injustice. So we want to equip people to think about not just doing anything, but about doing stuff really well, stuff that really makes a difference. So this deepening stage is all about learning, it's all about questioning, it's all about self-reflecting so that we learn how to do justice really well. If you don't feel 100% confident on this, that's totally fine. We expect that a bunch of you will still be going through this deepening stage. Some of us on staff team are still going through this deepening stage. There's so much to learn. So if you don't feel fully confident on what to teach here, that's fine. We just want to recognise that this is a stage that we all want to go through, where we deepen our engagement and pursuit with justice. So how do you move someone from action to deepening? Again, we've got 4 different ways. The first is momentum and challenge. So if someone's got a bit of momentum, they're engaging with justice, stuff's gone well, they fundraised, they volunteered, they've enjoyed it, things are happening, there might be a little bit of challenge of going, okay, that's great that you've got started. How could you do this better? How could you be even more helpful to that homeless person you've become friends with? How could you be even more helpful to victims of global poverty? What might be the best charity to fundraise for? We need to combine that momentum with challenge. There's also part 2 is frustration and grace. So sometimes people will become frustrated with their pursuit of justice. They're like, nothing's changing, I'm not making a difference, nothing's happening, this is hopeless. We need to have grace for that and say, actually, maybe we've not been going about this in the best way so far, but that's okay. There's forgiveness, there's understanding, we can work on it, we can make it better. Your value is not based on the success of your social justice endeavours. So we combine frustration with grace, and we point people to the hope that there's a better way of doing this. There's a deepening phase they need to go through. The next thing is theology, but it's a different kind of theology than the one we use to get from disengagement to awakening. This one is less about just saying that God cares about justice. This is about saying God cares about doing justice really well. What can we learn from the life of Jesus or from the Old Testament law that helps us to think critically and reflectively about what a really good pursuit of justice looks like? There's also, again, stories and facts. There are plenty of stories about doing justice well, there's plenty of stories about doing justice less well. Framing some of these in parallel, bringing some of these stories out can be a really powerful way of helping someone go, oh, okay, how can I do this better? How can I make more of a difference? I'll just give you one quick story as an example. It's around the idea of something called play pumps. So this was developed back in the 90s to solve the problem of water shortages in parts of Africa. So you might hear stories of women have to travel miles to a well to get water, or they have to use these hand pumps that are really tiring. Someone came up with the idea of we could build children's roundabouts which double up as pumps for water. And this idea got loads of traction, big companies started sponsoring it, celebrities got behind it, you had things like Live 8 and Make Poverty History, these big campaigns, the World Bank gave it money, they raised tens of millions of pounds, and they built loads of these play pumps. And it turned out that when they evaluated them, they didn't work. It was too hard to get the water going, communities didn't want them, children didn't want to play on them because you had to spin them for so long to actually get the water pumping. People preferred the old hand pumps, and yet tens of millions of pounds had been ploughed into this thing that seemed like a nice idea, but that was actually no good at all. And this is often the way we can go with justice. We think we've got a great idea, but we haven't tested it and evaluated it and asked the local community what they want. So we need to make sure we do it well, and that's why we have this deepening stage. So we move people to deepening through momentum and challenge, through frustration and grace, through theology, and through facts and stories. But once they've done that deepening, they're wrestling with the stuff, we want to move them on to impact. And this is usually the place where we get to towards the end of becoming students as we step out into the Just Love alumni network, engaging in this whole lifelong pursuit of Jesus and justice in the world beyond university. This is about having an impact through our career, through our giving, through our lifestyle, through our communities. It's similar to the action stuff before, but it's gone more long term, it's gone deeper, it's at a higher, more high impact level. We move from deepening to impact through teaching, through modelling, and through individualisation. We've already talked a bit about all of those, but just to touch on teaching, this is a deeper kind of teaching than before. This is teaching about good development principles, about things like effective altruism, about how to have a long-term impact, and we'll do more teaching on this through resources and through blog series and through JLAT, so you will get a lot of this teaching yourselves from us. But this is about a deeper level of teaching. Again, it's about modelling a more critical engagement, a better way of doing justice, and particularly if you're looking at things like career, that's a really individualised thing, helping someone work out how their skills could play out in a career setting. All sorts of different skills can be used in different high impact ways, and helping people wrestle with that as a Just Love group is really important. We'd love to see events around careers. So that's a summary of the spiral journey from disengagement to awakening to action to deepening to impact. And there's a couple of things to note on this at the end. One is that this isn't a journey we can ever really finish. The left-hand side of the spiral is all about deepening our learning and thinking about justice, and that doesn't stop at the deepening stage. There's so much more to learn about how faith and justice interact, about the spiritual rhythms we need to build in to do this for a lifetime. There's so much more to learn. And the same with the right-hand side, it's all about how we respond and act in the face of injustice, and there's so much more to learn and do there. So the spiral is a journey that carries on. The second thing is that we want to be really strategic with how we use this. Think about putting on a range of different events that will appeal to different people and add value to different people who are at different stages on the spiral. One thing we often see happen in Just Love groups is groups will put on a lot of events that are designed to move people from disengagement to awakening. But most of the people who come along are people who are already at the action stage and want to go further and deeper, and they just get told the earlier bits of the spiral again. Make sure there is that stuff to bring about that awakening phase in people, but really target it at people who are currently disengaged and make sure you get those new people along. Also, provide content for your core community who want to go deeper, who want to move into the impact stuff, who want that deeper level of teaching. Make sure there's stuff for everyone and that you're strategically trying to get people along to the right things. We'll talk more about that in the strategy and role-based sessions and other stuff through these 2 days, but it's worth keeping the spiral in your mind as we do these other sessions, because everything that Just Love does and trains you in is skills that you're going to find helpful as you try and work out how can we move as many people as possible as far down this spiral as possible. We've talked about the vision, which is where we're going. We've talked about the spiral, which maps the journey there. We're now going to talk about the values. These are the manner in which we travel, the rhythm of the road. And we have 4 core values in Just Love: living like Christ, relationships, student ownership, and quality. The first, living like Christ, is first for a reason. Jesus is at the heart of what we do as Just Love. We pursue justice because he cared about justice first. This is really important, and this means that we want to behave in Christ-like ways. It also means that we want to put scripture and prayer at the heart of what we do. We want to teach the Bible really well. We want to make space to pray about issues of injustice, and that's a really important part of the way we pursue this. It also means that our whole lives matter. You are key Christian leaders in your city. And so it can't be that you do Christian stuff when you pursue justice, but the rest of your life doesn't really reflect Jesus at all. We want his values and the way that he lived to seep into every part of your life. So living like Christ is a key value for Just Love, and that's the first and most fundamental one. The second one is relationships. Relationships are at the heart of our understanding of what justice is. Restoring broken relationships, restoring all things. We'll talk more about that in the theology session later. So that's a really important value, and that's gonna shape the way that we engage with the Christian community. We want to build relationships with everyone. We want people who come to our events, and even people who don't come to our events, to be known and loved and valued and understood by the Just Love community. It matters that we do things relationally, that we get to know people, that we talk to people, that we meet up with people. That's a real key way that we see growth. It also matters that we build positive relationships with other organisations, with other churches, with other charities, with other Christian student groups like the Christian Union. We don't want to be another tribe, another faction who doesn't engage with others and thinks we're better than them. Many of us will already be involved in other charities and in churches and in CUs, and we want to bring everyone together and be a diverse range of people from different kinds of church and space and background, but we want to bring people together, get to know other charities and build win-win relationships where people feel like Just Love is helping their vision and they're helping Just Love's vision. The third value is student ownership. And this is all about giving you responsibility, leadership responsibility in particular, to shape Just Love in the way that you think it should happen in your city. We've given you some vision and we'll give you some tools and some training, but then the particular events and focuses that you have are up to you, because it's important that you are developed as leaders. Because really the whole vision is about a generation of leaders who go and pursue justice. If we don't give you responsibility now, how are you going to become those people who learn and grow and take responsibility? So we want to give loads of responsibility to you, and we want you to go and give it away again to people who aren't on committee. We want you to give leadership responsibility to others. We want you to take the ideas of others in your community seriously. We want you to give ownership away. And our fourth value is quality. It's about doing things really well. It's not about a frantic perfectionism, it's about love. We want to have quality because we're seeking justice, we're seeking to love people, and we want to do that well. We want to glorify God in all that we do, and we're not doing that if we run bad events, if we don't look after our volunteers, if we give money to ineffective charities, if we're not evaluating and measuring what we do and seeking to improve it. This is in the little things like showing up on time, like replying to emails, like wording our social media posts carefully, and also in the bigger things like planning key events months in advance, like having a really well thought strategy that hits different parts of the spiral, like doing that deepening and good development research that means that we're engaging with justice really effectively. With all of this, there's grace. We'll make mistakes, sometimes we'll fail, sometimes we'll get it wrong, and that's okay. What matters is our intentions, that we're seeking to do it better, because we care about delivering this vision, we care about justice, we care about love, and so we want to do this to the best of our ability. We've got living like Christ, relationships, student ownership, quality. The vision is where we're going, the values is the manner in which we get there. I hope that you'll really buy into this vision and values over the coming year. It's such an exciting way to live. Talking of exciting, coming up next you have a break and a quiz. I'm kind of jealous, that's going to be really fun. Then you have an amazing theology session. What a day you have ahead of you. I'll see some of you in the role-based sessions tomorrow. Enjoy your break.